Okay, well, thanks everybody that joined, and thanks for everybody that's watching this in the future. This is the GitOps Principles Working Group meeting on June 23rd. Scott just shared the meeting notes on chat, and I'm actually gonna share my screen so that we can all see them and go over the agenda. Please let me know when you can see my screen. Yes, okay, fantastic. All right, so our agenda for today, like anybody and everybody, please do go into the notes and do add anything to the agenda that you want to cover. We had some action items from last week that I would like to really quickly go over. Last week, there was a conversation around kind of like evangelizing the principles of GitOps. I don't know, I think Christian, you were on the call. Robert, you were also on the call. William, I think it was pretty much the same crowd. So just any comment or anything in that regard in terms of kind of like evangelizing GitOps or the GitOps working group that you want to discuss during this call? Or should we mark that as complete?
I think we can't really mark it as complete, or at least not in my case. This week went really fast, so I haven't been able to send out stuff. But I think the general idea is just we should just bring this forward into a couple of meetings, I guess, and continue to try to get suggestions and feedback in general.
Is there anything? Oh, cool. We got hand raising. I didn't pay attention to who raised it first. Was it you, Scott?
No.
Nope. Yeah. Well,
maybe I don't know.
We got contention. Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. Okay. Well, in that case, I was just going to give an update for myself that I fell down on the job this week for my homework. I did not send the principles to other people. I felt the week went by really fast for me too, and I just didn't do it. So I think others may or may not have, but I certainly did not, and I want to now. I think what you said, we were gonna, ask folks in different ways. Like our idea was, let's everybody just like, in the principals committee, just like ask 3 people, that
Right.
may not be in that committee already for some feedback. And if people want to ask more people, that's cool, or post in other channels, that's great, but I didn't do it. That's my update.
Not a problem. Christian, go ahead.
So exactly the same as Scott. So
okay.
I was just gonna say the exact same thing as Scott. So yeah.
Okay, I guess a question from kind of like us chairs of the working group. Is there anything that we can provide you all that will help this easier? Namely, links, some kind of like anything that we could produce during this call or afterwards that would make kind of like just a copy paste email sort of easy to get this done. Okay, I see thumbs up.
We probably could, yeah, we probably could, but at the same time, it's like I'm going to be sending to a lot of Norwegian people to try to get that crowd's opinion. And that's just simple because they aren't really that active in these kind of working groups and these kind of things. So, not paying attention that much. But having like the general gist of things and something I can work off would be cool.
Okay. So I just added a produce copy pastable kind of like paragraph or pitch that can be shared via email and Slack with others. Anybody wants to kind of like get this assigned and have a go at it? I can just otherwise assign it to myself if nobody wants to kind of like give it a first stab. Going once, twice. All right, it's mine. Okay. All right, so this I'm gonna have available for next week, so that, or actually it probably can share it beforehand on the Slack channel, so that we have kind of like this standard artifact that we can just copy paste and send over to people on email and just share it around. Cool. Any other thoughts around this action item? Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, Leo, I'm happy to collaborate on that with you if it doesn't hold up getting it done. If it like makes it faster, because I know we want to do we have a chore already to collaborate on moving some items over from the GitOps working group to Open
Okay.
GitOps in pull requests. So no one's left out of the process, but just like to actually do some of the legwork for that. So if you think that we could spend a few minutes just like code chatting and busting that out, if that would be helpful, I'm co-volunteer. So just let me know.
Okay, fantastic. All right, awesome. And again, this is not just to leave anybody out. It's just it's easier to have stuff assigned to get stuff done. So we'll actually we probably want to put this in the discussion real quick, just for global visibility. Iterate on it, allow people to kind of like. I mean, it's like a small thing. It's not like we gotta complicate
Yeah,
it,
and it's really
overcomplicate it.
more of a, it can be just more of a guide so that people can just write whatever they want. Just it's
Right.
like a starter kit, right? That's a good idea.
Exactly. Just yeah, because it's harder to just what do I write? Hey, it's I don't know. It's kind of like eliminating that barrier. Cool. All right. So the other action item that we had from last week, am I putting it in the right place? Yes. Was to review this PR. Okay, so there is an open PR in the principles in the documents repo. Okay, PR number 9. That was initially proposed by Dan Garfield. And the whole concept is, how can we make the 4 principles that we've already defined shorter, more memorable, without impacting the concept being communicated. All right, so there is an open PR. Scott was very efficient and he summarized the I think it's three different alternatives as to how they could be reworded. So I'd like to basically open this up for discussion here from those that have joined us. Preference, opinions, and probably define a kind of like timeline to expose this to the broader audience, and then kind of like through lazy consensus, define a chosen alternative, a chosen version. Scott, go ahead.
I only wanted to couch a caveat with this, that just letting folks know that the summary was, I just tried to summarize what we all discussed last week. So just for anybody listening to this recording, or anyone on the call that might not have remembered that or been here, yeah, these didn't really come from me, but I did try to slap together some of the examples in that. So take that with a grain of salt, that the way that I worded them may not be exact, except for the first one, which is literally just removing that part of the sentence. So if we want to, I think there was another comment down below, Leonardo, from
See?
yeah, Jesse had a suggestion, and then William had a suggestion. Yeah, and that is kind of like it's a different option. So if we were going to do like a lazy consensus, however, we probably want to add that to the mix too, because he kind of had a suggestion of combining those two things.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks about these condensed versions, whether you'll have any one that particularly rings as most effective and accurate, and in general opinion. So the floor is open for feedback.
Can we get did you already put it in the doc, a link to the?
Yep, it's right here.
Yes, it is. Okay, I see it now. Sorry.
So actually, yeah, that's we just want to kind of give a minute or two so people can read up and get up to speed. I can actually kind of go through them while you'll
Okay.
read.
Yeah, this is the one from Dan. Okay, gotcha.
Right. So The whole, again, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, the whole idea is how can we, kind of like Dan's concern was this principles are as written. They are to some degree redundant in wording. They are too long to be easily remembered. And there's opportunity for us to kind of like reduce the verbosity of them without degrading the concept that they're trying to communicate, right? They could be just written up in one sentence and still communicate the ideal, the principle that we're trying to communicate. And these are the different versions. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, one thing I didn't even cover in this was the possibility, what you actually just mentioned was one of the things Dan suggested, and I just left that out altogether because I was trying to avoid basically just like exploding the trust of the group since since I think we haven't. He did at one point mention like, oh, perhaps this could all just be combined, but I think so far no one else has said, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea to reword the actual paragraph that we all painstakingly kind of went through.
Mm-hmm.
It's really only the first line that was, there's a bit of redundancy there, and it's just how do we deal with that redundancy was, I believe, what this scope of this issue is, even though I know he had mentioned that. I just want to say I don't think that's part of the scope of this issue now, unless someone, yeah.
Okay, so let me kind of like rephrase what I heard just to make sure that I'm getting it right. The whole idea is maybe we don't need the principle of rather just state the principle period, and therefore reduce the volume by quote unquote half, because there is a high level of redundancy in kind of like just the title to the explanation. Is that an accurate interpretation?
Exactly, and to be clear, that this is an optional thing that's in a pull request that is kind of a pull request / discussion at this point.
Mm-hmm.
As ways to do that, with it, and my strong suggestion would be to stay as faithful to what we all agreed to as possible, and whatever wording changes would need to be made. It's more just it's mostly a stylistic change at that point, but there are several ways we could address that. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm not leading that. It's just.
No, I think it's a very fair statement. I'm not quite sure whether Jesse or Christian were first. So do you know? Christian was? Okay, Christian, go ahead.
So yeah, so I'm just saying basically kind of what Scott was saying. My understanding is we're just doing the title, right? I think we're leaving the paragraph alone essentially, and just kind of trimming the fat on the title of so that way it's not as redundant. So that was my understanding that all this PR should be doing, at least.
Okay, all right. So it's not even removing the title, rather rewording the title to be more concise.
Yeah, that was my understanding, and I
Okay.
agree with that. Like if that's what we're doing, then I agree with that.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Jesse.
Hey, so yeah, I kind of want to float that I don't necessarily mind the repetitiveness. And I don't know if that's, I don't want to sidetrack us, but I just feel like just coming back to like, are we asking the right question? You know, if we perceive these things to eventually be like links to more full blown docs, or there's paragraphs below, there's more narrative to fill this stuff in. The idea of like the principle of this, the principle of this, the principle of this, it kind of doesn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
But if we decide that it does as a group, I think my vote would be on the sort of axiomatic approach that Scott floated. The only reason I gave a sort of a B.1 or an alternate take is just because there's a lot of musts in there. And I think we had discussed before, maybe not sounding so much specky, more guidance-y. I'm inventing words. So yeah, I think I like sort of the softer approach, but the intent of like saying these are axiomatic, I think I'm down with that. So I think that's got my vote. B in some form, if we have to go down this road.
I do think, however, that we don't really have consensus in that eliminating the title or condensing the title is the way to go. And I think Jesse kind of like raises a very valid concern that albeit the principles are currently written as a single sentence or a single paragraph, that doesn't mean that there is not an opportunity for further on elaboration, right? So in that context, the whole idea of having the principle of stuff makes sense. So does everybody agree with the fact that we don't really have a consensus moving forward with this, with changing the titles?
Yes, I think I typed this in, but since you're asking, I should just say it out loud. Oh, I'm sorry. Christian had his hand raised. My bad.
No, that was from before. I forgot to lower my hand. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So yes, I believe that the scope of this PR is what we discussed, just that first sentence. Even though of course it could be expanded, I would not be in favor of doing that in this PR. I would only be interested in continuing the discussion personally, and I would actually be strongly opposed to expanding the scope of this to change the wording of the rest of the principles, and even change the first line dramatically. But reformatting it, I am not opposed to, and I think it could actually be kind of nice. I agree with Jesse, it's not necessary, so I wanted to say that merging the PR, this is not something that we have a group-wide agenda to do, but several people have mentioned it, and I will say, at least my 2 cents is that as I've been describing it to other people, I've actually gotten feedback a little bit that it sounds a little repetitive, just because the initial GitOps principles, when they were described way back in the day, didn't have that line. And so if our goal was to make a 1-sentence version that's memorable with like a paragraph that gives some more meat on the bone there, so that people can actually memorize these things, not like memorizing not like memorizing the Gettysburg Address, but just be able to sort of spit out the 5 things without really thinking too hard about it. I'm definitely into that. So that's just where I'm coming from, but I don't think it's like the highest priority in the world. It just could be nice. And so if we get consensus around how to do it, we can do it through the PR. We don't have to get consensus in this meeting. That's what I think anyway. But I'm done.
Thank you, Scott. Go ahead, Robert.
I was just thinking that I too talked about this last principal meeting because I held a presentation on the principles, and it was kind of rough going through them and repeating everything, and it sounds very, and if we had something like, for instance, what William proposed, which is kind of like the 1-2 punch. So you have like the principle in essence, and then a little bit on this side there. You could use that in infographics. You can use that in a document and everything like that. But if you needed to expand and have, let's say, a big document like Jesse talked about, for instance, you could attach on top the principle of, and then declaration, etc. And so we could have it all, if that makes sense. We could shorten it for most cases, and if we had a reason to, we could attach on the principle of in front if that's needed. But just having like that if, even in a presentation, having those 4 boxes saying these things, would make sense in a shorter version.
That's fair. Thank you, Robert. Was somebody going to say something? Oh, no, that was Robert. Okay. I'm kind of like, what comes to mind is I think we should turn this problem into smaller decisions, right? I think one decision is, do we have to use the principle or not in every title, right? And that already kind of like moves, I mean, just thinking out loud, that moves us in the direction that we're heading without modifying content and just eliminating redundancy, right? Because if I'm gonna explain to somebody, all right, there's 4 principles of GitOps. The principle, and we have to repeat that. Maybe that doesn't serve any value, right? Whereas I can say there's 4 principles of GitOps: declarative, state, immutable versions, etc. Right? That makes it easier. So I guess the question is, should we open up a discussion focused just exactly on that one small problem? Do we need to include the principles in the title of every principle or not? I got a thumbs up from Christian. What do you think, Scott? Robert, Jesse, William?
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah, it's not it's not a hill I would die on, but I do think that it would probably be nicer and catchier without them.
It's a hill I'll get maimed on, but yeah, I mean, like Scott said, I'm not willing to die on that hill, but I do think, I mean, we're discussing it in a roundabout way now. We might as well just have an official discussion about it.
Okay.
What you propose, Leo, by the way, sorry, but what you propose, if we need the word, the principle, or the phrase, the principle of, I think that's what it's discussing.
Okay. So I guess if I were to summarize that in an action item, open discussion to define whether the principle, quote unquote, the principle of, quote unquote, can be or should be removed from every principle for ease of communication, I guess. I don't know how to put it. And to remove redundancy. Does that sound like an actionable action item?
Yep.
Okay. Cool. And I
For
guess
the
that's kind of
record,
like, go ahead,
I'm
Jesse.
just gonna throw out for the record, I don't even care about this hill, but if Christian's willing to be maimed on it, I got his back. So I'm going to.
All right. No, I think it's a valid hill. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, I think
That was mostly
Like,
for the joke.
if I look at, there's other, so maybe we can kind of like think about what other samples of this type of kind of like approach. Like I think about the 12 factors. I think about the Python Zen, right? I think about these different similar kind of like mantras, right? That you want to be able to easily repeat and whatnot. And like if I look at the Python Zen, it's just one short sentence that communicates a clear fact, and you can memorize them, right? And you can. So I think there's value in that. I think there's kind of like the underlying objective of the hill is valuable, right? The Unix philosophy, right? Valid Hill is a band name. All right. Go ahead, Scott.
Yes. So I think I want to just give just since we're talking out loud, and I can do this in the GitHub issue or PR too, but William, I just wanted to relate to or just connect to what you said. There's something about this in the context that it's presented in that looks really nice to me, you know, like with a single word that kind of stands in, but in the context of the whole principles where we've got a one sentence and then a one paragraph, I don't like adding an additional word because I think like the sentence should be the shortest memorable thing possible that conveys enough context so it can't be taken out of context. And I feel like the one word thing just kind of adds an additional layer on that. Like maybe in slides we could do that or something like that, but I would suggest not adding kind of like three layers of shortening. That's just my only thought about that. But otherwise I like it, you know.
Thank you, Scott.
I just wanted to speak it out loud, William, because and I'm going to write that too, but I just wanted to say
Fair point.
where
Fair
I'm
point.
coming from, personally.
Okay, so as far as PR9 then, I think kind of, I'm gonna go back and try and capture what we have defined and agreed on. It seems there's consensus in the fact that there is value to providing a condensed, more punctual way to communicate the concept. It seems there is consensus and that currently we have some level of redundancy. and that the fact that we are stating the principle is the most evident current redundancy that we have. So that's going to be kind of like atomic change number one, open up for discussion whether we can remove that evident redundancy as an initial step towards more degrees of compression, or more kind of like better compression going forward. Does that make sense?
Yes, but oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
I
There's
guess I
only,
still have my hand raised.
there's only 5 of us. Yeah, you. I mean, I think we can.
All right,
Yeah.
cool. Well, in any case, yeah. The only thing I want to be clear about is we may not be able to do it in successing in a series of PRs, because just the removal of the words without the removal of those repeating words and keeping the rest of the sentences as is, that is only one of the options for reformatting it, and it may not give the best possible message out of the other options. That's the only thing I wanted to say, that it is a change, and it may not be a change that can be rolled back independently without thought. You know what I mean? So like the decision, I agree with you, like it can be a smaller decision, but I feel like the change itself, we may want it to be part of the same PR so that we decide generally how that's going to change when it does.
Let me kind of repeat what I heard just to make sure that I understand. What you're saying is that a discussion constrained to the removal of the words "the principle of" alone cannot be necessarily applied individually, because it might result in a modification that in and of itself would void other alternatives as defined. Is that kind of like a valid interpretation?
Yeah, not necessarily void, but just we'd be making a change. It is. I'm just saying it's one of the options of how to reword those stylistically. That's all.
Okay.
And I think like, but I agree with you in breaking it down into smaller decisions. The decision that it's a valid thing to do. We again, this is a PR. It still has to go through a process, and it's in the end, it's but I think it's nice to do what you suggested, to break down those decisions to say, can we or should we? And what I heard so far is, I don't hear any real contention saying we can't, and that a lot of people would like to, so that's kind of like, with that decision, and not decision, but if that becomes true for the other people not on this call, you know what I mean? Generally speaking, and at least there's broad consensus of that, then I think you're right. That decision is kind of like, cool. We know we'd like to, but now how would we like to stylistically change it?
Okay. So what you're saying is the initial discussion should be not one where we define the way to go, rather just the common community consensus as to whether this is a direction that we want to go in the first place.
I just think you're right that they're kind of two different decisions, but they sort of depend on one another, So like, for instance, I could say, hey, I think it's a great idea to remove it, but secondly, none of the proposals for how to do it really sit right with me, so let's keep it as is.
Okay.
And I feel like everybody would probably default to that because we already put a lot of work into it. But and I feel like, Jesse, I don't want to speak for you, but I think, at least when I was relating to what you said, that's where I was kind of standing too. So if one of the suggestions for how to stylistically change it does that without diverging too much from what we agreed on, and it sounds awesome, and it's like more catchy and memorable, and we're all like, yeah, that sounds great, then let's do it that way. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense to your question, but that's how I was relating to what you said.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Comments from others?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's right. I think ultimately, like, we should break this down into pieces. That makes a lot of sense. But whatever we take action on should result in something that's still useful, right? I think that's really the kind of thrust of it. So yeah, I'm down with like breaking this up but then when it comes time to modify what we have, let's try and do it in one go.
Okay, so let me ask the group, if we're gonna break this up, I'd like to hear how you would characterize the first step, right? What is, if we have to define a cadence of questions towards an eventual objective, right? What is the first question that we would ask the community?
Does it need to abbreviate?
Does it need to be abbreviated? Okay, that's it. That's it. Okay, I'm actually gonna.
That's good. That's a good first, because does it even need it, right?
Okay, so this is Robert and Scott. Okay, other first steps, other initial questions that how we could frame this. Scott, go ahead.
Just there are some proposals for how to do this without altering without altering the substance of each of the one-line summaries. How should we do it if we're going to?
Okay, which I think that would become like a second question, right? It only if the common consensus is it actually does need to be abbreviated, does need to change. Then the second question is, which alternatives do we have to accomplish that, right?
Yeah, and I would even say the first question would be, is there value in changing it? Because I think like kind of like what Jesse was saying initially, like it doesn't actually have to change. And if, you know, it is good as it is, but could it be better? And so I think like we can't really do anything actionable on the first one. We can't say it must change without knowing that there's something better, you know, to change it to, or to change it to. I guess I just wanted to clarify that this is primarily a stylistic question and not a substance changing question, or like a dramatic substance changing question. The reason I mentioned that is because I did note one thing in what you said, Jesse, that I don't think we said out loud yet, is that there was, in some of the ways that I had re-stylistically arranged options B and C, some of the wording changed a little bit, because when you change the sentence structure, it changed a little bit. But there's but then I had noticed that when you mutated it, you added the word mutation, and I just wanted to note that consciously, because the other question is, you know, during the should we maybe adjust that wording a little bit like that during this change, or should that be a follow-up? You know what I mean? Like, is this an opportunity to say, hey, there was a little lack of clarity there when we said it, we should change that? Or should we just be like, let's be as strict as possible with this and not, you know? So yeah, not this round or whatever.
I think
you know?
it's because, like, I think fundamentally what you're pointing out is the difference between, if we say it's the principle of the principle of the principle of, like a bad rap. Thank you, Christian. If we go that route, we're really, those are titles of things that need to be then talked about. What we're talking about is the alternative of actually summarizing their intent. So we need things like verbs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. So I think once we've decided what the value is, if you know, if there is value in this change at all, which sounds like we all think there is, then maybe the second question is, how do we change what's there?
Yeah.
Like before we get to like, this is a proposal, like how do we change it? Are we making these more action statements? Are we changing them to be more descriptions? Are we, you know, that, because they kind of read like titles now, or names.
Yeah. And so far, by the way, just like a straw poll, and just from comments and everything else, it's that like pretty much the current leaning seems to be for axioms. It sounds just kind of nice, and they roll off the tongue, and we're basically saying what we think should be done as part of this way of doing things.
I'm going to add a comment here. I think the other question that we have to ask is, we've defined the principles. There might not be as nuclear or as condensed as they could be, but after all, we've dedicated a whole principles meeting to deciding how we modify what we just did. Whereas there is a whole bunch of other things that need to be produced, and additional content and clarifications and glossary and all sorts of other content and documents that we would be producing that might eventually even nudge the principles into some direction, right? So the question is, do we even want to focus on changing something we just finished now, or do we want to make progress with new material, with new ideas and new content, progress, and kind of like that might even solve the problem for us as we go forward, right? Christian, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you. So I think Leo, actually, as you were saying it, I kind of changed my opinion as you were saying it right now, what I was going to say. So I do think, so it's kind of almost also agreeing with Scott, is that there might be more pressing things to spend time on. I agree with that. I think my only thing is that there should be like, we should reach a consensus of should we have a conversation about simplifying the principles, like the titles, right? I think it's a perfect way of putting it. I think we need to, I guess, come to a consensus on that. But in priority wise, I do think that there's other things like the glossary and the best practices and creating on RFCs, things like that. So I think that's a separate thing, right? So I think talking about rejiggering, I guess, for lack of a better term, the titles of the principles, right? The principles is something's worthy, but I don't think it's then priority. That's like another thing, right? Like, where do we put that in a priority of doing things? So I do think there's other pressing things.
Thank you, Christian. Go ahead, Scott.
Echoing, I think we've given it a good amount of time. We probably, unless we have more to add right now, we've got 20 more minutes, or 19 rather. I'm gonna try not to make it 18.
Okay.
So,
Right.
so I was just gonna say an action item out of this could be, it seems so far that no one has added anything to the suggestion that Jesse made that was like an augmented suggestion, right? So maybe an action item, Jesse, if you want, is you could make GitHub suggestions, you know what I mean, on the PR for each of those lines. And, Dan could merge them in if he wants to. It's his PR. If he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to. If, you know what I mean, we could just go through the normal PR process at this point. And
Sure.
yeah,
If that's, I mean, is that kind of quorum for the folks present? Like, is that a good idea?
Can you very quickly summarize what you just said, Scott? Because I don't necessarily think I got
just
it.
basically action item is we probably don't need to dedicate more time to meeting about this, since we're not really adding more to the concepts. We're just kind of like talking about what we should do now in terms of process. So I was just saying action item could be like the last thing that sounded pretty good to most folks so far. It's, we're not agreeing on this. This is a pull request at this point. We don't have to like have some kind of consensus in this meeting necessarily. We can do so through the normal pull request process and just go. We'll just make sure to be very respectful of that during the merging of those pull requests. I was just saying an action item could be, Jesse could take that last version that we were all talking about and make those into GitHub suggestions that Dan could merge in, or into his pull request branch, and then we could just kind of let that take its own priority and move on to other things in the meeting.
Okay. I do agree we should kind of talk about more things that are also pressing. I don't necessarily agree we want to create kind of like issues or suggestions or PRs with change content when we don't have agreement that this is a priority for the principals committee, right? Because I think after all, that's going to produce, whether we want it or not, influence to sidetrack, right? After all, there's going to be PRs that are going to have to be reviewed and they're going to have to be discussed in this calls. So,
but we can time box them, you know.
Okay.
That's one thing I actually didn't even think to do during this meeting, but I'm glad you noted it, you know. And we could, like we've done before, you know, if something feels like it's taking up too much of the pie of our time, we can say, all right, we can dedicate a certain amount of time to this. We've got other priorities, so we're not going to go over more than 5 minutes chat for the meeting if we need it or something like that.
Okay, cool. So I added an action item. I added 2 action items. One is to open a discussion to define whether condensing the principles should be priority in the first place. And the other is is it issues? Well, I just put issues. You can change that, Jesse, as you see fit. Create issues with versions of principles in their reduced form, so that they can just follow kind of like the PR life cycle of their own. Is that a good way to phrase it?
I think Scott was suggesting just using the existing PR.
The existing PR? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Jesse.
That is a PR, right? And not a discussion.
And Leo, by the way, that's the reason I was just saying, hey, look, Jesse could just do that, or any of us could do that. But I was like, hey, why not Jesse, since he made the comment, you know? Or whatever, you know, because it already is a PR out there, you know. That's it.
Cool. All right. So I think that's that. We got 15 minutes left in regards to pull request number 9. The next item in the agenda, which kind of goes along the lines of what we've been discussing as to what other documentation we have to produce and what else is out there that we have to integrate into this new document repo. For those that are not familiar, we now have an open GitOps organization in GitHub, but there was a previous pull request in the GitOps working group organization and GitOps working group repo, which was the pull request that originated the need for the principals committee, because it was a pretty large PR with a lot of commentary from different parties. That's the reason that we got a principals committee, that we actually created a documents repo where the principals now live. But that does not mean that there isn't a lot of valuable exchange that had already occurred on this other repo, on this other PR. So Scott recommended that we actually need to go through this and identify what here must be integrated into the principles, what here must be integrated into the glossary, and what other documents should be produced and what is valid from this exchange. That is kind of like the gist of it, but Scott, you might want to go ahead and provide a clear first person perspective as to what your approach.
Sure.
was.
I'll be short and just kind of read it out. My goal is to see if you all like it as a way moving forward. So basically, what Leo was just saying, reviewing the additional content from the previous content draft as a team is probably what we could do for the next meeting. And if we have additional agenda items, maybe we could just. I didn't suggest doing that for this. I didn't even think about it, but you know, Leo, I'm glad you called it. We should probably time box them, you know, so that we have like, all right, we're going to dedicate a chunk of time to doing this because it takes some focus. So the process would be, I'm just suggesting like, what our goal is to collectively parse which portions of that PR are definitely, potentially, or definitely useful, potentially useful, or likely not useful for the current direction that we want to go in. Not that we're like necessarily like hitting the gavel and saying, that's it forever, but just simply, we're just kind of going through and trying to like really parse things into the right categories of work to do. And it can always change. Okay, so I got a thumbs up there. So and then basically of the definitely or potentially useful ones, I was thinking we could then shuffle those and just basically propose which document sections they'd be most beneficial in. You know, whether we're like, oh, these are things that could potentially revise the principles. We're not going to discuss them. at that stage. Just saying, this could be that we're going to put that in that bucket to sort later. Okay. And then are those things that we should add as temporary notes in the principles? Again, we're not going to discuss it. We have those already. We're just going to throw it in that bucket and say, in order to go through this stuff, we need to kind of like sort it first. You know, think of this as an algorithm. And then like, or should he go in the glossary? Like, I think as we're going through this, some things will be obvious for us, and we can be like, cool, that goes in the glossary box. And we can do this by just like leaving little comments on them, or we can literally throw them into a Google Doc for whatever we want to do temporarily, you know? Or whether it goes in the use cases doc that we discussed that we want, or some other supporting document, you know, and just leave it at that for now. And if we even get through all of that in one meeting, I would be both surprised and very excited. So I feel like I almost don't even want to go farther than that.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. So that would be kind of like plan for next meeting to come up with kind of like a time box, defined agenda of going through this document. Anybody?
Sorry, real quick. We could like say, all right, we got 9 minutes. We could do that now. You know, or 11 minutes rather. I'm willing to do parts of that. I just don't want to exhaust anyone by like, you know, like trying to shove too much in one. And I just want to make sure that one way, I was just thinking we could make whatever meeting it's going to be like just like a really like, all right, we're doing this. Yeah.
Go ahead,
That's
Jesse.
just my thought.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, this is a good plan. I like it. And I would not mind jumping in for 10 minutes and then picking it up next meeting. This might be something that people want to plan for participating in. So I would just say, like, I think we should sort of make it real clear that we want to do this next meeting. Kind of shout it out on Slack. I know I've lately been having a really hard time getting these meetings. I'm just really busy at the paying part of the job, but I'm trying to prioritize. So I think this is a good thing for us to socialize and be like, we're doing this. If there's like 4 people that really want to do this and can't make it next week, we can talk about maybe moving, because I think this is a pretty critical one. Your approach sounds perfect. First, let's start with all the stuff that we already have that, you know, 3 or 4 people put a lot of work into, figure out where it goes, how it goes, if it goes. Then we figure out, okay, who's going to do what? And that would come secondarily. I think this is a great plan.
Thank you, Jesse. Anybody else want to add any comments? Nope. Okay, so I think we got a plan. So first, we're going to socialize in Slack our plan for next meeting. Communicate time and date, and basically make sure that everybody who wants to join will join. Share the PR with everybody in Slack so that everybody has a chance to kind of like review it ahead of time and to know what we're going to talk about with community. And then next week, I'm just gonna say next week, we start categorizing existing content as to, what was the terms that you were using, Scott? Kind of like critical, dispensable.
I actually had all that written in just like one sentence in the
where in the
topic from last week.
Oh, okay. Review additional content. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
someone might be able to summarize that better. That's fine with me. Whatever works.
I'll just copy it over.
Okay.
Next week.
To be clear, I'm trying to be pragmatic, but I can be a little flamboyant, I guess you could say, in my rhetorical style. So if somebody, so I acknowledge it. You know, I'm happy to be. If there's anything anyone in the group can do to help us even be more to the point, I'm super happy. So.
Do we want to use a Drive doc next week? Do we want to do kind of like HackMD? Should we have something prepared so that people can start collaborating?
Yeah, sorry to jump in, but I liked the HackMD thing. I don't know, maybe some people did, some people didn't, but I actually loved the HackMD as like a working kind of scratch paper, and then eventually move that over to like a PR. So I vote yes for that. I like that approach that we did last time.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna add an action item here. Start a HackMD document with a template to organize content. So that we can basically just kind of copy paste either sections or titles or headers into the kind of like applicable bucket. Does that make sense? Okay, fantastic. Right. And also share that with the community. Okay. Okay, anything else that we want to talk about, kind of like plan for next week? And doc and kind of like content categorization and review?
I guess just the assignments,
Okay, so
for me,
starting.
for me anyway.
Okay, so starting a HackMD document, I can do that, or you can do that, Scott. Whoever. I'll just add me to it. The other assignment that we have is the paragraph for kind of like sharing with others. What other action items do we have to assign? So there's open the discussion to define whether condensing the principle should be priority. Who wants to start that discussion?
I guess I just want to say that we sort of have that discussion already in the PR. Maybe it just needs to be said like you just said it. Like you've done some work and making these notes. I think we could probably just use this PR as the discussion point, because unfortunately or fortunately, GitHub doesn't really have a way to convert a pull request to a discussion. Otherwise, I think that's a cool feature.
But we didn't even used to have discussions. We just did everything in pull requests, so it's fine.
Right.
It's fine. This all used to be just done in code comments.
Right.
No, yeah, I think that's a great idea, just to jump on that PR and just kind of co-opt it and be like, hey, so we were talking about whether or not we even need to make this change. Can we start with just getting consensus on that and just get some upvotes right in place? I think that'll work fine.
Okay. Oh, so that was basically what you were gonna take care of, right, Jesse?
Oh, actually, yeah. Do you want to do that, Jesse?
Oh, I can. It wasn't me, but I'll totally do it. Yeah.
Okay, so
I'll be that guy.
You're volunteering.
Okay, so I'm gonna add a kind of like up down vote comment to current PR, open PR, to basically to get votes as to whether it's something we want to do or not. That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. And I'm gonna say this is Jesse. Okay.
I mean, it might just be worth saying, like, does anyone have a strong objection to even doing this at all? But I would hope that they would do that on a PR if there's a PR to change it, Anyway,
yeah, I think
Jesse, the best way to communicate it. There's a billion ways to do it. I'm sorry, I'm accidentally bike shedding just now.
No, it's good. It's good. Okay. All right. I think that's as far as assignments and action items. We got 3 minutes left, so I don't know if anybody else has anything to cover, or we can wrap it up with a couple of minutes. Go ahead, Scott.
Only just like the assignments for the next meeting is the only other thing that would be.
Right.
Yeah.
I can moderate next. If you all agree, I met the bar set by Scott. I would volunteer to moderate next week as well. Or was it that Dan had already said that he would moderate next week?
Oh, actually, Dan suggested he would like to moderate next week.
Okay, so I'm just gonna add here Dan, and we confirm. Okay. Next week is I was just gonna say okay.
Yeah, it's almost July.
No.
For you moderators, do you prefer taking notes as you moderate, or do we actually want a moderator and a separate note taker?
I personally
I'd
don't
be
mind taking
open-
notes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, some people like it. Some people prefer that if they're the moderator, they like to. If Dan wants a note taker, I can do it. If he wants
Okay.
to do it, he can do it.
Okay, cool.
I'll just say for my since you asked, because I've been doing the moderating a lot, I really love it when someone else is doing it too.
Okay, cool.
Just
Yeah, so we can leave it up to the moderator, I think.
yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, that's that then. We got 2 minutes for calling anything that we got to get done before our next meeting. So let's do that. Thanks everybody for joining. And we'll catch you all next week. I'm going to stop recording now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.